Well, guys, hey, what's going on? It's me, Jay. We have a lot to talk about here, and this is a big one for my wrestling community fandom. Hulk Hogan has passed away today at the age of 71 years old. The icon of professional wrestling, the face to many people of professional wrestling, the first wrestler ever to transcend the the genre, the sport, the form of entertainment since Gorgeous George in the 1950s is gone from us. Virtually everyone on the planet knew who this man was. They knew what he was associated with. And a lot of people, Lisa says crazy times. What's going on, Lisa? A lot of people, and Lisa's perfect for this because Lisa doesn't watch wrestling. Lisa doesn't know any of these wrestlers that we do tributes to or that we do videos to. But Lisa does know, and everybody knows who Hulk Hogan is. The immortal Hulk Hogan. Well, I guess he's not so immortal now. OTC, what's going on? Um, he has passed away in his home of cardiac arrest. Um, when I first heard the news, I thought it was a hoax. I believed it was not true because Randy Hogan, a Hulk Hogan impersonator, passed away not so long ago. Famous Hulk Hogan impersonator, and people thought that that was Hulkster, that was Hogan, and it wasn't. It was the impersonator. And Bubba the Love Sponge, his friend, and the guy whose wife he had sex with on the tape, Heather Clem, uh, a couple weeks ago announced that he was he was sick on his deathbed, and then we didn't hear anything from him. And then Jimmy Hart came out, his former manager and close friend and confidant, came out and said he's doing just fine. And then this happened. It was a cardiac arrest, a heart attack, so it was sudden. Um, Honestly, I have mixed feelings, and I'll tell you guys why. A lifelong wrestling fan as I am, of course I know who Hulk Hogan is. I loved Hulk Hogan as a child. When I first got into professional wrestling, the first match I ever watched was a Hulk Hogan match, April 2nd, 1990, WrestleMania 6. It was Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. RIP to them both. And I love this guy. You know what I mean? He was wrestling to me. You know what I mean? But, and that's a big but, towards the latter half of his life, he was a controversial figure because in 2012, for many reasons, but let's go to the obvious reason that a lot of people consider him a controversial figure. A lot of non-wrestling fans. There's reasons why wrestling fans consider him a controversial figure, and we'll go into that later in the video. But the reason why non-wrestling fans consider him a controversial figure is because in 2012, well, actually, it wasn't. It was, I think, before that. I think the tape was recorded in 2006, right? He was having it was a tape of him having sex with his best friend's wife, Heather Clem, his friend's wife, Bubba the Love Sponge, the radio DJ out in Tampa. He was a shock jock, kind of like Howard Stern, kind of like Wendy Williams. Well, anyway, this guy basically was like a Diddy or a Kanye. He was into other men having sex with his wife and him watching. And he wanted Hulk Hogan to do that. He put it on tape. And in the course of this tape, Hogan is seen discussing his daughter's boyfriend at the time. Brooke was just getting into music, his daughter Brooke. And uh, she was, hanging around. She was involved in hip hop and R&B type music. She has one song that became a little bit popular, featuring Paul Wall. What They Know About Us. Hogan's in the video. But anyway, she was dating her producer, who was a black guy. And Hogan on the tape is heard saying the N-word, and also heard saying that he is a little bit racist, and he repeatedly uses the N-word. He says, well, if she's gonna marry somebody, a black guy, I prefer to be a basketball player that makes hundreds of thousands of dollars. A basketball N-word, effing N-words. I hate N-words. I guess everybody is a little bit racist. I admit I am a little bit racist. And he was saying this to the friend's wife that he just had sex with. Pillow talk, right? And Gawker, the website, the tabloid website, got a hold of this, and later it was released, right? And people were shocked by it because, let's just face it, Hulk Hogan, throughout his professional career, was associated with a lot of black celebrities, a ton of black celebrities. His first big event for the WWE, WrestleMania 1, March 31st, 1985. Who was his tag team partner? Mr. T. What black celebrity was he associated with in WCW back in the 90s? Dennis Rodman. So they were like, what, Hulk Hogan's a racist? But then, in 2015, this leaks out to the WWE. He had just come back a year before, in 2014, from being 4 years in TNA. And he was on a Legends deal with WWE, and they fired him, and they removed him from the Hall of Fame. He was disgraced, right? And, and he was the persona non grata. He was Chris Benoit status. They didn't mention him at all for years, up until 2018, right? And people were like, well, he's fucking racist. Like, fuck him. He's a scumbag, right? And he goes on this apology tour, telling people, I'm sorry, brother. Trying to cover it up. He says, when I was growing up in Tampa, which is a lie, people would say, hey, N-word, to each other. Good morning, N-word, to each other. And that wasn't true. Like, Hogan, you were born in 1953, okay? Even black people back then in the 60s and 70s it was a widely used, disseminated word of any other kind than the racist kind, right? And you're a white guy. So, a kind of white guy, identifying as a white guy, basically. Like, you weren't saying the N-word, in the street. Come on, like that was just a lie, okay? But that's just the tip of the iceberg when it came to Hogan, because then the years that succeeded that, we began in subsequent years, we began to hear him say other things that were questionable, other things that were like, whoa, that's crazy. Most of it was lies. You know what I mean? Like, for example, it became a running joke, like it is with Fat Joe. Like this, he's like, okay, hip hop has Fat Joe and wrestling had Hulk Hogan. Like, the guy lied so much that it's like, okay, this is funny now. Your lies are funny because you lie on a constant and consistent basis, and we're catching you out on your lies. You know what I mean? So he became the butt of a lot of jokes to people, especially to the wrestling fans and to the non-wrestling fans, like persona non grata. But anyway, like, for example, one of his lies. Before he was a wrestler, he was a bass guitarist. He did play guitar. And one of his lies was that he was supposed to be a bass guitarist for Metallica, the band Metallica, despite the fact that Metallica came up in California and he's from Tampa. And they asked Lars Ulrich, a member of Metallica, is this true? And he says, no, he never met Hulk Hogan. He doesn't know who Hulk Hogan, not didn't know who Hulk Hogan was, but didn't know Hulk Hogan on a personal level. Like, that's a lie. He was never going to be the basis for Metallica at all. He was never that good, right, at music, right? And then other lies. For example, that he, like, recently, I'm talking about recently, like a couple months ago, he said that because him and Eric Bischoff are launching this. We're launching this Real American freestyle amateur wrestling organization, like not professional wrestling, but amateur wrestling, real wrestling. And he said, I wrestled Brock Lesnar right after he got out of the UFC. I wrestled Kurt Angle. I wrestled Benjamin Shelton. And people were like, you couldn't even respect the guy enough. Shelton Benjamin, that's the guy's real name, a black wrestler. You couldn't even respect him enough to get his name right. And then when Hogan went on his apology tour, when they brought him back to the WWE, 3 years later, they put him in front of the locker room with all the wrestlers, and he didn't apologize for saying the N-word. He didn't say, I'm not a racist. Like, when this usually happens, Paula Dean, Morgan Wallen, other famous people that have said the N-word or racist things, they go on apology tours or whatever. He didn't do any of that, right? He doubled down. Again, that's why I compare him to Fat Joe, because Fat Joe does the same thing. When you catch Fat Joe in a lie, or you catch him saying racist or sideways shit about black people or whatever, he doesn't apologize. He just doubles down, and he continues to say the exact same thing. So anyway, with Hogan, what he said was, he told the other wrestlers, he basically said, I'm not sorry I did it. I'm sorry I got caught. You know what I'm saying? He said, watch out. They got kizamas, speaking carny or wrestling slang. They got kizamas everywhere. So watch what you say. Not, I'm sorry, I'm not racist. I appreciate the black WWE superstars. I don't dislike black people. I don't hate black people. He didn't say any of that. He doubled down. And a lot of wrestlers, weren't feeling that. They were like, fuck Hogan. You know what I'm saying, for that, especially the black talent. So it gets even worse, because during the 2024 presidential campaign, Donald Trump, and I have a statement here from the president about him. Hulk Hogan campaigns for Donald Trump. He speaks at the RNC. Probably his speech was the most famous. We have a video on it. The most famous part of the 2024 RNC, where he's speaking about Trump being assassinated. He said, they tried to assassinate my hero, and that's when I knew enough is enough. And people are like, oh, well, I mean, he's MAGA now, right? And he made a statement saying that he was going to body slam Kamala Harris. And it's like, you want to see me body slam Kamala Harris, to a crowd of people. So, I mean, that's that. You know what I mean? People can feel the way they feel. And, at the time when the racist controversy came out, I made a video about it on my old channel. And I said, well, what do you expect? This man is a man that grew up in the 1960s, a white man that grew up in the 1960s in the South. Like, I mean, I expect them to kind of be racist, kind of. You know what I mean? But people took it as, they were insulted. They didn't like that. I didn't like it. You know what I'm saying? It broke my heart when I found out that Hogan was a racist. And the things he said, and the reprehensible things that he began to represent throughout the later part of his life. Also, he launched a beer brand called Real American Beer, and the original model for this beer brand was a black African, black girl, an African American girl, and he had her removed, and he put in her place, a bunch of white women to be the model for the beer, right? So what does that tell you? You know what I'm saying? So he was a liar and he was kind of a racist, but there's no denying the impact that he had on the genre of professional wrestling. He was the most famous wrestler that ever lived as far as modern wrestling. Gorgeous George, Jim Londos, that's the 50s and the 30s, respectively. We weren't alive back then, and during Gorgeous George era, TV had just come out, so you can't count them. You know what I'm saying? So you have Hulk Hogan. Everybody knows who Hulk Hogan is. He's the most famous wrestler ever. You know what I mean? And he was responsible for the two booms that professional wrestling experienced, both in the 1980s, from 1984 to 1991 or 1984 to about 1992, and the second boom from 1996 to 2001. Like, without him, there would be no Rock, there would be no Stone Cold Steve Austin, there would be no WWE. Basically, he built WWE was the house that Hogan built, and there's no denying that. You know what I'm saying? There's no getting away from that. You know what I mean? His legacy is what his legacy is. Sort of like Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? In a different way. You know what I'm saying? Like, he had his controversies, but he had such an impact upon popular culture and his field, his medium, that you cannot talk about him you cannot really cancel him and talk about this topic. You know what I mean? Like, you can't talk about professional wrestling in any sort of capacity from the 1980s onward, basically my era and like the era of the WWE, without talking about him. He was it. He was the most famous wrestler. He was it's like talking about basketball without talking about Michael Jordan. It's like talking about baseball without talking about Babe Ruth, or it's like talking about music without talking about MJ, or hip hop without talking about Tupac. Even the Tupac had his controversies as well. You know what I mean? So, they're not without their controversies, but they are the goats of their field in terms of revenue. In terms of revenue and popularity and a draw, Hogan was the best. Now, in ring, he was not the best. He was one of the worst. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you loved wrestling for wrestling, Hulk Hogan was not your guy. You know what I'm saying? It was usually, this is the way it went as a wrestling fan, at least for me and for a lot of other people. We got into wrestling because of Hulk Hogan. We started to watch, and then we liked other wrestlers that were better wrestlers. It was similar to hip hop. A lot of people got into hip hop from listening to Will Smith. You know what I mean? But Will Smith was not considered by hip hop fans as a true representative of the hip hop genre by the hardcore fans. They would pick other people, but they probably got into wrestling. Probably got into hip hop through those commercial acts, either Will Smith or MC Hammer or Vanilla Ice, those type of commercial, what they call pop rappers, and then they got into it deeper and they got into other people that were better. You know what I'm saying? The more hardcore fans respected. And that was very similar to me. I got into it through Hulk Hogan, but as I got older, I liked Macho Man. I liked the Ultimate Warrior. I began to like Owen Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Scott Hall, all these other wrestlers. But Hogan got us. Hogan was the entree. Hogan was the appetizer. You know what I mean? That got us into wrestling because he was a mainstream celebrity, and these other guys weren't. You know what I mean? So let's talk a little bit about him. He was born in Georgia. His mother is Panamanian uh, and Italian, and his father is French and Italian. So he did have some POC in him, like Hispanic. He was a little bit of Hispanic heritage in a way. And he mentions that in his book, which I have, his 2002 book. Now, it was true. His mom really was Panamanian and Italian. Like with Hogan, you got to take stuff with a grain of salt, but he really was, Panamanian on his mother's side. He was born in Georgia, but pretty soon he would move to Florida. And he was a chubby kid at first, and he got into baseball. And he wanted to get in shape, so he started to work out, and he became big and huge, and then he started to play. He had his band Ruckus. He was a bass player and shit. But wrestling, he discovered, growing up as a kid, he loved Dusty Rhodes. This was the time of the Tampa territory, the Florida territory, championship wrestling from Florida. Tampa was the home base, the Tampa Sportatorium, ran by Eddie Graham. And Hogan, he was in luck because he went to high school with Eddie Graham's son, Mike Graham. But he was kind of unlucky because Mike Graham didn't like him. They didn't get along. But he hooks him up with, a tryout and a trainer, a Japanese trainer named Hiro Matsuda, who breaks Hogan's leg. Like, he breaks his leg to see how dedicated he really is. And Hogan, he thinks it's real at first. He's like, oh shit, my leg is broke. But Hulk comes back, and he keeps coming back. And eventually they put him in there as Terry Bollea, which is his real name. And he's skinny. Like, his old videos, like when he was wrestling in Florida, is really skinny. But he doesn't have any success. So he goes back to his music career with the band. And, but he still wants to try out this wrestling thing because he loves superstar Billy Graham. He loves Dusty Rhodes. And he loves that kind of stuff. And he still wants to be a wrestler. So eventually, Jack and Jerry Briscoe, who were two big wrestlers, down there in Florida, they they convince him to come back and, have a